Oi, oi, it's your boy, Mr. Too Damn Positive, Jack Slack, and it's the Jack Slack podcast, and boy do I feel silly for getting my hopes up over the weekend. Everyone's always like, oh, Jack, you're so negative. Oh. And I was, everyone was pooping all over this card, the Chad Dawson versus Bobby Green experience, and I said, do you know what? There's a one card on. There's Bellator 300. And a UFC card. I think some interesting stuff will happen this weekend. And yes, some did, but an awful lot of this was just straight bad. Can't fault Bobby Green. He came out and did his job. Possibly too effectively. Stepped in with the left straight. As Grant Dawson was lunging in with a jab, and I believe the left straight started before the jab, so it wasn't even a counter, or intended to be a counter. And Dawson jumped onto it face first. Green follows into the ground, hits him, gets the TKO. I believe the fourth in Bobby Green's 80-fight UFC career. Very funny. Grant Dawson, try plant floor, son, or something to that effect. You rearrange those to make a pun about him face planting into the floor in your head. No, a bit sad for Grant Dawson because he was on a really good run. But good for Bobby Green because he's well past his best. And in his last two, he's beaten a guy who's actually legit in Grant Dawson. And, it sort of washes the bad taste of that Tony Ferguson win and how seriously he took that out of your mouth. A lot of people have rightly pointed out that Tony Ferguson is just going to take this as a cue to continue fighting, though. I did knock down Bobby Green. But then how bad was the card? The card was so bad that Joe Pyfer was the co-main event. Joe Pyfer versus Al Hassan. Abdul Razak Al Hassan is purely a meme fighter. If you wanted a heavyweight, someone who finishes in the first minute or gasses out and looks like crap, at middleweight, Al Hassan's your man. Was part of that trading of meme knockouts with Chirico and Joaquin Buckley. But yeah, the moment that Joe Pyfer ducked in and tied him up, I was like, oh yeah, Al Hassan's getting worked here, because if you can drag it past the first minute, Al Hassan is not winning. When was the last time he won a decision? Literally never. That's astounding. Well done, that man. Loses 100% of fights if they go the distance. But Joe Pyfer ducked in on clinches, and I thought they were good ducks. He got Al Hassan swinging at him, and he just did a little duck to the outside of the lead shoulder. Entered the clinch and started trying to take him down. He was hitting single legs with his head on the outside, which does offer the guy the chance to wrap your head, which is what Al Hassan did the first time they hit the mat. Al Hassan couldn't quite work back to a decent guard and threatened to finish the guillotine. But the second time they hit the mat in the second round, Al Hassan held the head but didn't get up to his arm and didn't start making stuff happen. So all that happened really was that his elbow was open and Joe Pyfer's head was inside there. And Joe Pyfer could just pressure up into mount and get the arm triangle. It's this trade-off on the ground. You can be awkward by threatening the guillotine from a lot of weird places, threatening to be able to get back to guard, get up on your arm. Watch someone like Cub Swanson in MMA or Ricardo Lamas, guys who are very good at wrapping the head and then sitting up on one hand. And they're always threatening, if you drive in on them, they'll sit down and sit down on the other hip and finish the guillotine or threaten to finish the guillotine. And if you don't push into them, they'll just stand up. But if you can't get up onto your elbow and start threatening to stand up, all you're really doing is holding the head. Now, there are actually a couple of guys who've done that decently. Luke Rockhold, if you watch his fight with Chris Weidman, uncomfortable to watch because Weidman just gets murked and has never recovered, basically, from that fight. But before Weidman does the silly spinning kick and gets himself beaten half to death, the fight's pretty even, and Weidman takes him down. And obviously Weidman is a brilliant fighter on top. And Luke Rockhold just holds this guillotine while Weidman passes to side control. It's an arm-in guillotine, so there's no threat of the Von Flue. But he just keeps bumping and threatening to move back to guard, and Weidman has to hold him down, not able to do anything, really. And they might have stood them up from that position in the end, because he held it for about a minute and a half without getting hit or hurt. But if you do wrap someone's head when they pass your guard, or to be honest, if you wrap someone's head in half guard or whatever, you are leaving a big opening between your elbow and your body, and that's part of the hard part of scoring submissions. You've got to get people's elbows away from their body to attack arm bars, kimuras, head and arm chokes. Basically anything good. You've got to get their elbows away from their body. And if they're wrapping your head all the time, they're doing that for you. But I think a good part of this, from the perspective of like considering Joe Pyfer's potential, was his ability to create trades and then capitalize on that by entering takedowns. In wrestling, international wrestling, collegiate wrestling, whatever we're talking about, you're going to go watch some wrestling. 70% of it is setting up good shots or getting yourself into a position where you can shoot. There's a lot of hand fighting. There's a lot of faking. If you watch like kids in college, there's a lot of going down to both knees and like trying to bait the other guy into sprawling and running through him. But it's a whole aspect of the game that doesn't exist in MMA. And a great deal of how effective a shot is in wrestling is how it's set up with hand fighting. How a shot is set up in MMA is boxing. You've got to box and get the guy boxing back, or kick and get the guy boxing back. But you've got to initiate a trade. If the other guy shells up, it can be a lot harder to take him down. Honestly, like, if you take aside the skill of finishing takedowns and chaining takedowns and all the stuff that is still in MMA, the best part of entering on a takedown in MMA is doing double end bag work, but against a real person. You're throwing a 1-2 or a 1-2-3 or a 1-2-1, and you're ducking. And that's what Joe Pyfer was doing in this one. He did enough to get Al Hassan throwing back confidently and then ducked in. We're always talking about like Frankie Edgar versus Jeremy Stephens. Frankie Edgar had nothing in terms of power for Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens, big hitter, didn't knock out a lot of people because he was so clumsy, but did have a great chin as well. And he hurt Frankie Edgar, and Frankie Edgar bit down on his mouthpiece and hit Jeremy Stephens as hard as he could in the face. Obviously not going to knock him out, and Jeremy Stephens goes, right, we're trading now, and just runs onto a takedown. Frankie Edgar was knocking nobody out, but he managed to convince everyone that he was going to trade with them, just long enough for them to forget about defending their hips. So yeah, Joe Pyfer, is he... They put his, I heard that they put his submission victory over a very mid-fighter in the worst co-main event in recent history. In the ESPN top plays of the day or some shit. They are making a concerted effort to push Joe Pyfer. But really, it only works if you put him on a card where you don't display any of the actual real talent that's available in MMA. Drew Dober fucking stole the show by knocking out Ricky Glenn spectacularly. One of the things I really liked was one of the punches that hurt Glenn before the knockdown to finish, was an uppercut that came across the chest and forwards. So where you think of an uppercut, it goes upwards, and it's sort of think of your shoulder, bend your arm to 90 degrees, and then it's just your shoulder could be pinned in place, and then everything just rotates around the shoulder like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. But there's a kind of uppercut, think of like Prince Nazim's corkscrew uppercut with the lead hand, where you throw an underhand punch that rises but goes towards the opponent. So you're extending at the elbow as you do it. And doing that with your rear hand is far less common than doing it with your lead hand. Guys do it with their lead hand, and it's called an up jab or a corkscrew uppercut or whatever. People will throw it to set up their rear straight, particularly southpaws against orthodox fighters. But throwing it with your rear hand can be quite tricky, especially if the guy's ducking a lot, if he's going to level change, or if he's just crouching down because he's worried about your overhand. And the reason that I really noticed it with Dober was because I've been watching a lot of Roman Kopylov, and he hit one of these against, not Fremd, the guy he fought before Fremd. Oh, he might have hit it against Fremd, actually. Oh, no, sorry, it was Puna Soriano. Because Soriano is just an overhand. And every time he came in, he threw his head forward and threw the overhand across the top. And Kopylov kept covering up and crouching in and pushing, going high forearms guard and pushing his head into Soriano's chest so that he got inside of the overhand. And then he just shot this left uppercut underhanded and forwards towards Soriano, and it just chin-checked him. It was fantastic. It's like the first punch that really hurts Soriano in that fight. And he does it from time to time, and Eddie Alvarez used to do it occasionally too, like this straightening uppercut with the rear hand. But Dober did that to Glenn and caught him across the chin, hurt him, chased him, knocked him down. Ricky Glenn grabs the cuff with both hands, and Drew Dober's like, hey, like looking at the ref, and then I'm going, oh, who's reffing this? And out from the corner of the picture comes Chris Tognoni, and I went, oh, fuck yeah, we're gonna get some meme moments tonight. And then wouldn't you know it, Drew Dober chases Glenn to the fence, knocks him down with a left hand as Glenn's stepping in, and Glenn sort of collapses at his feet onto Chris Tognoni, and Chris Tognoni has to like dive out of the way, having Ricky Glenn bounced his head off Tognoni's shin. I have a thread on Twitter or X or whatever it is now of Chris Tognoni moments, because he's always tripping over fighters. He just stands way too close. He's a space invader. I'm gonna have to get the Police song "Don't Stand So Close to Me" so that I can use it on the soundboard whenever we're talking about Chris Tognoni, along with my Pat Barry button. But yeah, another great win for Drew Dober. You know, always entertaining. Never really put it together at the really upper echelon, but he was on a great run of 3 wins with Bobby Green, Rafael Alves, and Terence McKinney before he met Frivola. You know, he got blown out of the water by Makachev back in 2021. But I'd say basically back until the Olivier Aubin-Mercier one in 2016, which is, you know, so long ago now, most of his losses are to really top guys. You know, the exception would be like Brad Riddell, who is hit and miss, and Dober sort of fought him where he's strong. And Frivola, who, like, remains to be seen how good Matt Frivola is, because he's on a really good run. And he doesn't have an awful lot of fights, to be honest. He's got like 15 fights, whereas Drew Dober's got something like 40 fights. But yeah, on the Boycast, I was like, yeah, Drew Dober, he's always going to be around the top 15, just, you know, being Drew Dober. And now that they're extending it to the top 20, he'll probably always be ranked. But I didn't realize he's not in the top 15 at the moment. Someone was calling for Dober versus Chandler today, and someone was like, oh, Chandler would murk him. No, what do you not know about Michael Chandler? Michael Chandler loses to like 50% of the people he meets. It's just that he has this incredible athleticism, and because he was Bellator champion like 3 times, people just assume that he's one of the greatest fighters in the world. He was champion 3 times because he lost it 3 times. In fact, I think he lost one for the vacant title, so he's actually fought for the title more times than he's won it. Sorry, just got to get that in, my Michael Chandler moan of the day. Not an awful lot entertaining on this card, but actually this links in nicely with the one card this weekend. If you haven't read it, I forgot to plug it at the beginning, but my post-fight breakdown this weekend that I wrote, I always write something on the Sundays now. Whenever there's fights, I write about something interesting that stood out to me, or several interesting things that stood out to me. This week, I was hyper-focused on the Aoki lock, which is a nasty, nasty footlock, which I'm also actually good at myself. It's so rare that I get to talk about grappling techniques that I'm decent at myself. But I subtitled it like A Short History of a Nasty Little Submission. And the Aoki lock is really interesting because Aoki destroyed Kawajiri's Achilles with it. And it made a comeback for Achilles locks in gi jiu-jitsu, where leg locks were not that common. And as leg locks were taking over, after leg locks took over no gi competition, people got good at defending heel hooks, and the straight ankle lock made a comeback via the Aoki lock. So you got guys like Mateusz Szczecinski and Mikey Musumeci doing great stuff with that. There's a whole load of controversy in the gi because it can be a rotational lock like a heel hook, in addition to instead of just a straight foot lock, which is how Mikey's always used it. I would just say go read that article because, yeah, it's really in the weed shit. But on that card, Than Lee fought Ilya Freemanov, which is the fight that I was most looking forward to this weekend. I thought that was a really fun matchup between interesting strikers. Freemanov immediately took him down. And Than Lee, I'd been saying, like, Ryan Hall had told me years ago to look out for Than Lee. He'd been working with Ryan Hall. Didn't even realise Ryan Hall was in his corner for this match. And boy, did he look like Ryan Hall, because he did a sit-up escape from side control. So he just sort of like rolled and wrapped the head in like a headlock, like he was into a crappy pro wrestling takeover. But if you've seen Oliveira versus Kevin Lee, Charles Oliveira sweeps Kevin Lee by doing that. He turns away from side control, grabs the head, and just rolls him over in the really like basic pro wrestling filler move. But yeah, Than Lee sits up like that, goes to all fours as Freemanov's attacking it, going to the back, and he rolls through his legs for a victor roll. As you'll see Mateusz Gamrot do, as you'll see Gary Tonin do. So he gets on the leg and he passes it across to 50-50. He starts attacking it. And he goes backside 50-50, which is real bad, and Freemanov turns to face him. And then Freemanov made a mistake by sort of hopping around the ring And Thornley went through his legs again and turned belly down and onto backside 50-50. Backside 50-50, so dangerous. Backside 50-50 is the position where everyone remembers Ryan Hall versus BJ Penn, so I'll just go with that one. But it's where the guy is like, his knee is on the mat and you're behind him trying to tear his leg off. And he has to sort of backstep towards you or try and turn around to face you. It's a really nasty position if you get stuck there. Lachlan Giles did a load of good work with it in ADCC 2019 against some giant dudes. And so if you get to 50-50 and the guy stands over you, 50-50 is a leg entanglement. We won't go too basic here because I presume everyone who listens has seen a 50-50 before. If you get to 50-50 and the guy stands, it used to be that you try and tilt him outwards, externally rotate his knee, which is a great way to make people fall over. That's like as old as time. That appears in like Chinese kung fu forms and really early forms of wrestling. But it still works. It's the John Smith low single. If they don't resist or they don't drop their knee, you just turn their knee out with your head. Or the Sakuraba one, where you turn it with your shoulder. But it used to be like the 50-50, you try to externally rotate their knee. But now guys roll inwards between the legs and collapse the guy's knee in, and they go to backside 50-50. And I just mentioned Kevin Lee versus Charles Oliveira once already, but he did that in that fight too. He attacked the 50-50 several times against Kevin Lee, and he kept turning and buckling Lee's knee down and going onto the backside. And he did a backside saddle at one point, which is something that's catching on nowadays. But yeah, if you want to read about that, I wrote an article called Absolute Masterclass Oliveira versus Lee way back in the day on the Patreon. Go check that out. But yeah, it was a great outing for leg locks because Mikey Musumeci Aoki locked Shinya Aoki. And Thornley, after fighting Gary Tonin last time and proving that leg locks weren't real, decided they were real again in this one. And I think it's quite interesting because people look at the success of guys like Thornley against Gary Tonin and Chad Dawson against Leo Santos and stuff like that. And they go, leg locks don't work. And yeah, finishing a leg lock in MMA is a lot harder, but they do still work to create movement and force positions and stuff. We always talking about Charles Oliveira uses them to turn people away from him when they get on top, because you can't really hit someone if your knee's facing the other way. You can't, put your weight into punching them if your knee's facing the other way. But it's easy to forget that, like, Thornley trained with Ryan Hall for a long time to be ready for Gary Tonin. Chad Dawson is a very, very good grappler all around. And he went 3 hard rounds with Leo Santos, who gasses in the second round always anyway. So that one was a bit, But then there was a really bad one on this card, the UFC card this week. Some lad from Shooter Box, Matthias Mendonca. Matthias Mendonca. I think Mendonca should be a name for a person with a huge ass. But he pushed Nate Maness to the cage and couldn't get takedowns. So then he started trying to roll on leg locks. And he just got stuck on the bottom getting punched. And he actually got to what's called double trouble, which is the old Danaher Death Squad position. You got the saddle on one leg and you're holding the other. And Nate Maness should have been in a lot of trouble. But it still takes time to finish things. And Nate Maness was just defending himself and punching at the same time. And even if you're sat on your ass, punching a guy in the body can tire him out pretty effectively. And Mendonca looked really just exhausted by the time that Nate Maness came up on top and started pounding him out. But yeah, Mendonca got absolute tunnel vision on the legs. And it was just this, particularly with saddle stuff, you got to be able to keep inverting. You got to be able to keep putting your head underneath their hips, because otherwise you're going to get stuck on the bottom and just smashed, which is horrible. I think that's why you're seeing a lot of success with like 50-50, firstly, but also the outside ashi is not so commonly seen in grappling nowadays because it's a tricky position where you can get your back taken and stuff, but or just get smashed. But you do see outside ashi quite a lot in MMA, used in scrambles and things, or when a guy's hurt, he'll manage to get the outside ashi, and it gives him time to, or even recompose himself, or even come on top. But he keeps threatening the leg anyway. It seems to be the saddle where people end up getting smashed, which is interesting because it used to be that the saddle was like the most dominant position in grappling. Saddle, inside Sankaku, whatever you're going to call it, 4-1-1. So yeah, interesting week on the leg lock front. Let's hop over to Bellator, because Bellator Bellator 300 was supposed to be like this huge celebration of Bellator, with the thinking that like Bellator 301 was going to be the last one or whatever, and the company's being sold. And you can see this going on because they still don't have any sponsors on the mat. They've got no sponsors on the shorts. Nobody wants to be involved with a company that's being sold. But man, Ryan Bader versus Linton Vassell made this card for me, and with it gone, dude. I mean, there was a lot of women's MMA this weekend that I saw on the UFC and Bellator cards, but having two title fights, Liz Carmouche versus Leigh McFarlane, that's not great. And then Chris Cyborg versus Kat Zingano, who they've been like trying for ages just to get enough wins to fight Cyborg. You know, it's a Cyborg fight. Again, who really cares? It's women's featherweight. So your main event turned out being Usman Nurmagomedov versus Brent Primus, part of the tournament, which is looking less and less good as it goes on. All the interesting fighters are gone. Brent Primus, obviously, he out-grappled Mansour Barnoui, my boy, in the last one. And Usman Nurmagomedov beat Benson Henderson in his last one to get this fight, or to set up this fight. It was a title fight. It was 5 rounds. Brent Primus did nothing, and Usman Nurmagomedov did slightly more than nothing, but also not a whole lot. I was watching in like almost every Usman Nurmagomedov attack against the orthodox Brent Primus took him into southpaw, and then saw him like backing up with. He either kicked with his right leg and landed with a southpaw jab, or he ended up backing up and throwing the southpaw jab as he was shifting back into southpaw from orthodox. Basically, always ends up southpaw jabbing with his left hand down by his nipples. And I'm going, oh my God, I hope someone sees this and starts throwing like right straight high kick off everything that Usman Nurmagomedov throws at them. Because it was constant in this fight. It was crazy. Usman Nurmagomedov, obviously enormously talented. I'm not as hot on him as some people are. Like on Reddit, following this fight, there was loads of talk of like, well, when he inevitably comes to the UFC, Islam will move up to welterweight. And it's like, no. Why would he? He didn't when Khabib was the champion, and both of them cut enough weight to almost, successfully hospitalize themselves several times between them. Those dudes are so serious about fighting that they will not give up an ounce of advantage. They're not just going to fuck around for the fun of it. There's still dudes on Twitter telling me like, no, Khabib would go up to welterweight if George St. Pierre was on the line or was on the table, and Islam will go up to welterweight to fight Colby or whatever. It's like, no, they won't. Hit me up when they do. Then I'll apologise and say I was wrong, but they're not gonna. So yeah, I'm not super stoked on Usman. I think he's very talented. Obviously, that camp has a great track record of producing very good fighters, and you can watch him and see that he's very good, but I don't think I'm as hot on him as a lot of people are nowadays. I did like his elbows in this fight because he had this really nice takedown. He hits an outside trip where he passes the leg to his arm. So it starts as like a little foot trip, and then he picks it up and just finishes it like a single leg or a double leg. And it reminded me a lot of Adam. Is it Satiev? There's two brothers, and Adam Satiev is the younger one, who beat Yoel Romero in the finals of the Olympics to win the gold. And he does a lot of starting with trips and then dropping down to finish on like a single leg or a double leg, or just bundling the legs together. And it's a nice thing, you know, judo, you start with the leg trip and you're not allowed to then reach down and grab the leg. Actually, if you watch any Frank Chamizo, he does an awful lot of like uchimata and then grab the ankle on the opposite leg. But Usman has this outside trip where he picks up the leg and then he passes it off to his hand and gets the takedown. And then Brent Primus would end up in guard and he would do nothing. He wouldn't open his legs and try to get up. He wouldn't throw elbows. You know, there's times when like people... Okay, so in this fight, not a lot happened. And people were like, well, Brent Primus couldn't do anything because of the level that Usman's at. And it's not really true, but that's especially not really true of like being on the bottom, because you could see that he wasn't trying anything. He was just holding on. To try things, you have to physically move. Like it's not like the fight unfolded in our minds from closed guard, and I realized that I couldn't beat him. So yeah, that was very disappointing that Brent Primus is just like grabbing his own leg and stuff, fucking around with rubber guard that, you know, even if you do know what you're doing, barely ever works. And Usman sort of like kept his head in his chest and then occasionally threw a couple of elbows and cut him up. But I mean, you know, par for the course. Brent Primus, competent, good top player, Not a great striker, not a great bottom player. Just a, generic creator fighter wrestler, basically. But the co-main was Chris Cyborg versus Kat Zingano, and honestly, Chris Cyborg, I have so much respect for her for how she's improved herself. Because if you remember, like, back to the Gina Carano days, and god damn, isn't that a long time? She's been at this a long time, but, especially the fights like the Holly Holm fight really showed that she has sharpened up no end. Because she could get by doing the Jessica Andrade thing and just swinging. Because she's got huge power, she's bigger than almost everyone she fights, and she's strong as hell, so she doesn't have to worry about getting taken down. She doesn't have to keep her elbows in when she punches. She doesn't have to keep everything tight, because if people get on her hips, she'll just ragdoll them off. But she has got way more accurate, way slicker, way better on the counter. She spots things, she exploits things very quickly, and it makes her even tougher. I don't think Kat Zingano was awful here. I thought she made a good attempt at it, and then hit a wall and was like, shit, she's a lot better than me. And was getting beaten up the entire time too. Some very weird sort of striking from Kat Zingano. She'd throw like a lead hook and run up lead leg kick and then try and lean in and get the takedown off that like double legger. But double legging people when you're kicking and sort of on one leg, what happened to her in the last one was she like hit Cyborg's hips and fell over because she was off balance. She just sort of thrown herself into this takedown attempt. So that was a little bit sad, but the really sad one was Ilima-Lei Macfarlane versus Liz Carmouche, because Ilima-Lei wasn't ever really that good. It was more that like there wasn't anyone around. Like if you watch her fights where she was throwing up submissions and things, it's just because she's not fighting very good competition or very competent opponents. But she had a couple of rough losses. She had her knee destroyed, I believe, at some point, and they've been desperately trying to get her back into the title picture because they love Hawaii, and she's got a big following there. And basically, her and Liz Carmouche knew each other. They sort of pity-patted with punches for a while before Liz Carmouche kicked her in the leg, and it almost immediately buckled. And then the fight went into the 5th round with Liz Carmouche just occasionally kicking this leg. And she kicked her, went down. That was the end of it. And basically the commentators were like, oh, that's a shame. The other hilarious one was Leah McCourt versus Sarah McMahon. I always say Leah McCourt had one of the worst fights I've ever seen. Not exaggerating. I say that about a lot of fights, but genuinely, if you want to see one of the worst fights I've ever seen, or that you will ever see, I think it was Janae Harding or it was Jessica Borger. Just dreadful. But Sarah McMahon comes out, gets the back body lock along the fence. Leah McCourt, they're touting her judo black belt. She throws Sarah McMahon, and then they just roll through, and she ends up in exactly the same position with Sarah McMahon behind her along the fence. It was so funny. But then she did it later, and Sarah McMahon let go during the throw and ended up on the bottom, and Leah McCourt pounded her out. I mean, Sarah McMahon was more accolades than she ever was as an MMA fighter. It was like, get her into that Ronda Rousey fight quick, because she hasn't shown an awful lot of impressive stuff in MMA, but she is an Olympian, and that's good selling against Ronda Rousey. I think she was a silver medalist, wasn't she? Oh, and Ronda was only like a bronze medalist, so yeah, I'm talking about out my arse. It was 2 Olympic medalists against each other. I think Kayla Harrison was she the first women's American judo gold medalist? I can't remember, and I don't care, and no matter how much women's MMA they put in front of me, it doesn't seem to get any better. Above 115 pounds, obviously. Everything atomweight, strawweight, banging. Flyweight, getting better. Bantamweight, featherweight, terrible. But yeah, after this Bellator event, I basically just felt sorry for Bellator. This was supposed to be their big thing, and it kind of sucked. They got one more event booked midway through November. That's got Sergio Pettis versus Patchy Mix. That'll be a fun one. Amasov versus Jason Jackson. God knows how Jason Jackson got a title shot. Patricky Pitbull versus Alexander Shabley. Shabley's been like the dark horse of the tournament, the lightweight tournament, but knowing how uninteresting Bellator is, he'll probably lose to Patricky Pitbull, and then we'll get an uninteresting Patricky Pitbull versus Usman Nurmagomedov matchup in the final. And you got Rufian Stotts versus... Wait, why is Rufian Stotts fighting Danny Sabatello again? Have they run out of ideas? AJ McKee versus Sydney Outlaw. It's where they fought too. Tyrell Fortune versus Marcelo Golm. Yeah, I mean, can only hope that that's better. Meanwhile, UFC next week, we've got Sadiq Youssef versus Edson Barboza. Low-key banger with a Jennifer Maia co-main event. We got Jonathan Martinez versus Adrian Young. I mean, we got some fun stuff happening on that card. At any rate, go read the article I wrote. It's much more interesting than the fights were generally this week. And I'll be back on Wednesday, Thursday to talk about the fights coming up this weekend. I might even talk about Lee Wood versus Josh Warrington, because that was good fun in the boxing world. Lee Wood randomly came out and fought southpaw, despite never having done that before, and got clattered in the process, and then finally knocked out Josh Warrington, just as things were seeming really bad. Anyway, yeah, I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Join the Patreon. Check my website, fireprimer.com. Send me an email, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And I will catch you Wednesday, Thursday. Watching Muay Thai fans cry over how much bigger European fighters are, but also defend Superlek coming in 5 pounds heavier on purpose. Bless.